Okay, we are finishing up we are starting part 4 in Echo today. So we're going to start to see all of their stories finish and come together. So we're coming back to Friedrich. And the first thing we're looking for our question is what Elizabeth's relationship with her family is now, and what was life like for father in the camp. And those are your two questions for this story. And those should be questions that we were left with at the end of that part, too. On an evening embroidered with the thread of destiny, in a theater crowned with a halo of light, Friedrich Schmidt escorted Father and Uncle Gunter to the best in the house seats. Friedrich's eyes swept to the tiered boxes, dress circle, and upper balconies, their facades intricately carved with laurels and painted gold. He'd been told the concert was sold out, but he still couldn't imagine every seat filled with concert goers. You two don't mind waiting? In awe, Father waved his arm in an arc. We will sit here and admire all this majesty. We wanted to be early, said Uncle Gunter, to see the evening unfold beginning to end. It is quite an honor to be seated by the conductor himself. It is a long road you have traveled, Friedrich. We have traveled, Uncle, together. After all, who taught me to ride a bicycle and play the harmonica? Uncle Gunter laughed and winked. I did. You're a sweet boy to remember. And who was my first and most accomplished teacher? He squeezed Father's shoulder. Father smiled at him. Thank you, son. Uncle Gunter tugged at his collar where the silk tie he wore was knotted. His suit was a far cry from their factory overalls. You know I only wear a tie for a few occasions, but your concerts are always worth the trouble. In recent years, Father and Uncle Gunter had attended many concerts where he had conducted, but tonight was a pinnacle debut. Friedrich perched on the arm of Father's seat. As impressed as they were with this moment and the miraculous journey that had taken them from Trossington to Bern and ultimately here to Carnegie Hall in New York City to conduct the Empire Philharmonic. So we see he has made it to be a conductor, and he is at Carnegie Hall, which is one of the most, is the biggest places for somebody that is a performer to be able to perform in. Tchaikovsky had conducted his own compositions on the hall's first opening night. The Tchaikovsky. Friedrich could hardly believe he'd stand on the same stage. As if feeling his thoughts, Father said, They say that all the musicians who have performed here have left a wisp of their spirits behind. Friedrich nodded. People talked about the undeniable energy in the building. How could he harness it? Do you think Tchaikovsky was as nervous as I am? Father shook a finger at him. Of course, and I would say the same thing to him. You have as much right to be on that stage as the next conductor. Just put one foot in front of the other and look up. Friedrich patted Father's shoulder and smiled. I'll remember. On stage, the musicians' chairs sat empty in several large semicircles waiting. A concert grand piano guarded the left of the stage. Father put a hand on Friedrich's. It is difficult to believe we are here. It seems like yesterday we were in Trossington. I only wish... I know, Father, whispered Friedrich. I miss her too. Friedrich knew Father still held out hope that he would one day see Elizabeth again. He never stopped writing to her, so she wouldn't forget the sound of his voice. Not during the war, when she had remained a devoted nurse, even caring for soldiers in a prisoner of war camp, or in the years following when she worked in a pediatric hospital in eastern Berlin. Friedrich wrote, too, especially when the opportunity to move to America was arranged. He had begged her to join him and Father and Uncle Gunter for a chance at a new life in a new country. She refused, saying she'd found her true calling. Still, Friedrich couldn't help but continue to hope that he, like his brave imaginary friend Hansel, could one day lead his sister home to their father, and that someday they'd all be together once more. Friedrich often wondered what might have happened to them if Elizabeth hadn't sent the Reichmarks for Father's ransom. Father was right. It didn't feel like 18 years had passed since that fateful day on the train heading to Dachau. Okay, so you see the three little stars at the top of the page? This is showing you that now we're getting what happened at that moment where we left him. Okay, so we're backing up to that story where we left Friedrich, and we see what is going on with Elizabeth. They don't have a relationship with her. She's alive, but they don't. Father's still writing her letters, but their relationship hasn't healed. So here is back where we left him. The engine had already started to chuff. Friedrich had heard the music to Tchaikovsky's Sleeping Beauty waltz and pretended to conduct, infuriating the two officers, Eiffel and Faber. As they tried to march him off the train, calling Friedrich a lunatic and promising to lock him away, the whistle blew, long and insistent. The train lurched forward and began to move. Eiffel and Faber shoved him aside, scrambled to the door, and leaped to the platform as the train ticked over the rails, leaving them far behind. Uncle Gunter had been right about the holidays. More people were traveling. The trains were crowded. Everyone held packages and seemed more preoccupied with the season than with the self-conscious boy gripping his father's future on his way to Dachau. After the commandant listened to Friedrich's appeal and examined the box of cookies, he accepted the package and sent for father. Friedrich tried not to look alarmed when he saw him. In a little over a month, father had gone from energetic and strong to weak and frail. He dragged one leg. He seemed disoriented. Disoriented means not really knowing what's going on, confused. Friedrich helped him from the camp, walking and resting every few minutes until they reached the first farm, where Friedrich borrowed a goat cart and pulled father to Munich, to the home of Uncle Gunter's friend, the doctor. It took weeks for father to recuperate enough to begin their journey to Switzerland. Father refused to talk about what had happened to him at the camp, insisting that it was nothing compared to what was done to others, and becoming tearful and adamant that he was one of the fortunate. After a while, Friedrich stopped asking. Uncle Gunter was waiting for them in Bern. He and Friedrich took jobs in a Swiss chocolate factory. Father gave cello lessons. Eventually, Friedrich applied to the Bern Conservatory. One path led to another. It was strange how on such an auspicious occasion as tonight, in one of the most famous venues in the world, venues is a place, Friedrich's thoughts kept wandering back to his beginnings. He looked down at his father and uncle, who by some miracle were at his side, safe and healthy. And instead of the concert before him, Friedrich flashed back to his happiest childhood memories of Friday night get-togethers in the parlor, with Elizabeth at the piano, Uncle Gunter on his accordion, father on the cello, and Friedrich on harmonica. Their polkas accompanied by the occasional rally from the cuckoo clock in the hall. Musicians began to appear on the grand stage. Dressed in black, they took their chairs, adjusted their music stands, and opened the scores. The wind instruments ran the scale to warm the pipes. The violins mewled and purred. Friedrich stood. I should go. He smiled at father and Uncle Gunter and headed toward the side stage door. Before he opened it, he glanced back at the house. Father and Uncle Gunter looked small amid the field of red velvet seats. Father sat straight and tall, studying his program. Friedrich could feel his pride even from a distance. The ushers opened the lobby doors and people began to filter inside. Friedrich fled backstage, stepping up to the wing and leaning against the wall. He closed his eyes and concentrated on the concert. A portrait of stage and film, he smiled. Musicals and movies were such an American fondness, and he admitted he liked them too. He replayed the program in his mind, the first half dedicated to George and Ira Gershwin, starting with Porgy and Bess, a symphonic picture. Orchestration by Robert Russell Bennett, with the main songs from the orchestra opera. Friedrich loved the orchestral classical composition. It would be followed by Rhapsody in Blue with a featured piano soloist. Who do you think the piano soloist might be? After intermission, he would conduct the South Pacific Suite, music and lyrics by Rodgers and Hammerstein. It was the most popular musical in the city right now, and a coveted ticket on Broadway. The baritone Robert Merrill would perform selected songs from the musical, closing with Some Enchanted Evening. There were rumors that the composer and librettist Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein friends of Robert Merrill would be in the audience. Friedrich closed his eyes and his hands went through the motions of conducting the first overture. For a moment he stopped and looked around before starting again, his memory so deeply set that he couldn't help but remember the school bench where he'd once been bullied for conducting an imaginary orchestra. But here, everyone was focused on becoming one voice. They all spoke the same language and had found their way to the night with their own stories of determination and practice and their love for music. Here, he was safe. The stage manager nodded to Friedrich. The musicians were in position. The concertmaster stood and lifted his violin, playing the A. On stage, the violins hummed in response. The cellos and basses moaned softly. Chords filled the room as the musicians checked the tuning of their instruments. The oboe sounded and the wind instruments matched it. Friedrich searched out the new flautist. That's how you pronounce that. It looks like flutist, but the word is someone who plays the flute is a flautist. She'd seemed nervous in rehearsals, so he'd taken time to talk with her. She was one of the youngest players he'd ever encountered in a symphony orchestra, but supremely talented. There was something intense and purposeful about how she played, a feeling he couldn't quite pinpoint, but at the same time understood. Her eagerness to embrace the music and surrender to it reminded him somehow of himself. So I wonder who the flautist is. Bit by bit, the sounds dwindled. The hall hushed. When the house lights dimmed, a smattering of clapping erupted. The stage manager pointed at Friedrich. Although he'd long come to terms with the birthmark on his face and even refused the heavy stage makeup that some managers offered him, Friedrich still hesitated for a few seconds in the wing, wanting and dreading the walk on stage. Every performance in front of an audience was always a journey fraught with the unknown. He whispered the good luck phrase he always said before he headed to the conductor's podium, the same words he'd whispered to his harmonica that day that he polished it and sent it out into the world. Gut Reise, safe travels. He strode on stage and was met by a wave of applause. Friedrich picked up his baton and raised his arms, poised to give a slight flick of the wrist to the percussionist. 4 long chimes, like stepping stones to another world, rang out. Friedrich slipped into the opera's story, the music filling him with the emotion of Porgy's plight, much of it resonating in his own heart. A lonely man with a crippled body, a bully who thought he could rule the world, an ever-present evil, the loss of a loved one to something beyond his control, and what seemed an insurmountable challenge. Friedrich moved the orchestra into the tender song Summertime and anticipated the rising emotion in the music. He imagined the lyrics, "Hush, little baby, don't you cry." The music was bigger than Friedrich, overpoweringly beautiful, euphoric and true. He was swept inside it. The orchestra was with him, and he with them. This was what he had craved as a young boy when he imagined himself on the top rung of the A-frame ladder on the factory floor, 2 stories high, and directing an imaginary symphony. A magnificent sound from a union of many, a story that came alive through the playing. He brought the orchestra to a crescendo and a final emphatic finish. When the music stopped, Friedrich held his breath and waited. There was always a moment after the last sounds and before the ovation, an elegant pause that Friedrich cherished. It was a pure space filled with one question. Had the audience listened with its heart? Okay, so we see Friedrich again. We see that he made it. We see that Father's still alive and they're together and that he has made it as a conductor. And now we're just waiting for, like she started at the beginning of this chapter, the threads of destiny. Okay, and as Christians, we look at that through a different eye. We see that God is supreme over all things and can make anything happen and come together according to his will. All right, so this is the fun part. A good ending to a book makes the whole book worthwhile. So we're right at the ending and we've got the first part today. I hope you're enjoying it. We'll see what's going on with Mike tomorrow.